Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the uncomfortable truths and staggering statistics on the ski slopes of Davos. It's that time of year again, the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, and it's the anti-poverty charity Oxfam taking on the billionaires in Switzerland. Also this week, China's new normal as the world's second biggest economy marks a shift to an era of slower growth. We'll find out why the man in charge insists the economy is on the right track. And the United States and Cuba hold their highest level talks in decades. We hear from the people of Havana about where they think the recent thawing in relations will take their country. You know, it's easy to look at the World Economic Forum in Davos as just rich people in the snow talking about stuff. But this year it was one of the groups on the other side of the coin which made headlines with some pretty harsh truths. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still plenty of rich and influential people talking. In fact, if you wanted to hear one of them talk, there were even mobile robots on hand to keep you up to date with the discussions. Has to be said, though, the tone at this year's event was decidedly less upbeat. There is an understanding, which we've looked at recently on this show, that the global recovery is not assured, especially on the continent where Davos lies. And that was illustrated by the group I mentioned earlier. It was the charity group Oxfam. And look at the economic bombshell it managed to drop very early in the piece. It's saying by next year, 1% of the world's population will own over half of the world's wealth, 54% of it. That means simply the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. Money is sitting in offshore bank accounts, earning interest for its owners, when maybe it could be used to invest in job creation and public services. So what to do about it? Well, Brazil's a good example, one of few places where the gap's gotten smaller. The government's up to the minimum wage and cracked down on mass tax avoidance by corporations. So let's start by hearing from Oxfam's executive director, Winnie Byanyima, who was also one of the Davos Summit's co-chairs this year.
This is not about corporate social responsibility. It's more fundamental than that. It's about how business is done. Okay. Business should not be about making profits simply. It's about solving problems of society. So we are asking the business leaders here to see themselves as part of communities in finding solutions for a fair and prosperous society, part of government. We want to work together to make this world a better place for all. So the reception I am getting is, over time, is better and better, because don't forget that when we first started talking about inequality, we were seen as envious and were on the margins. But increasingly, our message has come to the mainstream. Now you have intergovernmental organizations, world leaders like President Obama, the Pope, Christine Lagarde, all saying that economic inequality is bad for business, bad morally, and bad for society. So we're being listened to. Now we want solutions. So I'm here to push for solutions, to ask the tough questions, to broach the difficult issues, but the solutions are known. Economic inequality is not inevitable. It's a result of policy choices. With the right policy choices, we can turn it around and make a fairer and more prosperous world. So I'm here to tell the leaders that here are the solutions. Let's work together on them.
But even for the richest 1%, there'll be less wealth to go around. The International Monetary Fund's made the steepest cut to its global growth outlook in 3 years. So for a global perspective on that sort of outlook, Ali Velshi from Al Jazeera America spoke to the president of the World Bank, Yong Kim.
There's a tremendous divergence. Now, the U.S. seems to be on a very, very good path. The U.K.'s done well. Europe and Japan remain very disappointing. And one of the things that we see is that in the BRICS countries, part of the notion of the BRICS countries was that more or less they were growing in the same way. But now we see tremendous divergence among the BRICS countries. China and India are still, China's over 7%. India will soon get to 7%. But the other countries, Russia especially, there's as much as a 5% contraction that we would expect in the next year. So disappointment and convergence, and it gets back to some of the fundamentals. So the countries that are going to do well are the ones that have the courage and the vision to tackle structural reforms. Now, I was just in Gujarat with Prime Minister Modi, and the things he's been able to do in a very short period of time are very impressive. You know, forever, India has acted like a number of different states with different tax systems. And so, for example, transport takes forever because you have to go, as you cross every state, you have to pay a different set of taxes. He has put into the parliament already a goods and services tax that will make uniform the tax system in graduated steps, but this is really important. So it's the countries, it's the same for Europe as it is for Japan, as everyone else. The countries that take the opportunity to make the reforms are the ones who are going to be better off.
India is so belabored with some of these problems that, in fact, if Modi can do in India what he did in Gujarat, that could actually work. You can sort of see a trajectory. They've got legislative issues and legal issues to deal with. You mentioned Japan. Japan's structural issues are fairly serious. And it's not clear for a whole lot of reasons, including their inability to attract immigrants into the workforce there, that they can address all of these problems.
Well, I think, you know, the growth was disappointing, and the sales tax had a bigger impact than anyone thought. There was a big spike in consumption before the sales tax, but the drop-off has lasted a little more than I think people would have expected. I have to say still, and from my perspective, I am very impressed with Prime Minister Abe and Deputy Prime Minister Aso's commitment to the reform process. It's going to be hard. Yeah. It's really hard. But look at the things that they've already done. I can't imagine that another group of leaders would have been so bold in terms of monetary policy. So, for Prime Minister Modi, I actually has told him that if the ranking in our doing business ranking was based on Gujarat instead of on cities like Delhi, they would move from 169th in the world to 50th in the world. Now I told him that, and then soon after he set the target for all of India to be 50th in the world in the doing business ranking. We're actually working with him to do that. That's the kind of boldness and courage that you need to survive in the current global economy.
Yong Kim there from the World Bank. Now, China's Li Keqiang was also at Davos, the first Chinese premier to attend since 2009. He was there to shore up international confidence in the Chinese economy and did so with a speech full of metaphors. Have a little listen to this.
If I could compare the Chinese economy to a running train, what I would want to emphasize is that this train will not lose speed or momentum. On the contrary, it will be powered by a stronger dynamo and will run with greater steadiness and bring with it new growth and new opportunities.
But earlier in the week, a report on China's economy showed growth in 2014 had slowed for the first time in nearly 25 years. Adrian Brown has more on that from Beijing.
Economists say that no number matters in the world right now more than China's GDP. GDP, of course, is the best way of measuring a country's economy. And now new data has come out showing that China's economy grew by 7.4% in 2014. Now, that is not what the government had hoped for. They had been hoping for economic growth of perhaps around 7.5%, which is essentially what it's been for the past few years. And this represents really the slowest economic growth in China in almost a quarter of a century. Why? Well, a housing bubble affecting fourth and fifth tier cities, and also a lingering belief that banks are underestimating the extent of bad loans on their books. Now, these are loans that the government encouraged the banks to make to try and stimulate economic growth after the global financial crash in 2008.
If we have a disruptive slowdown, and that's what would happen if we ran out of debt capacity limits, if we ran into our debt capacity limits, that could be quite bad for China and quite bad for the world. I don't think that's going to happen. So far, it looks like we're going to have a stable adjustment.
While China's GDP is slowing, it is still the envy of the world. But this remains an economy that is transforming. For instance, retail sales in December were up by almost 12% from a year earlier. Industrial output for the same period was also up by almost 7.9%. Both were better than the government had forecast. But the danger remains China's property bubble, since the real estate sector accounts for a third of China's GDP. And that's one of the reasons why the International Monetary Fund is now forecasting economic growth for China of 6.8% in 2015. Economists warn that anything below 6% could spell danger for China, job losses, and what the government here fears most, instability. It is a reminder that what happens here has the potential to affect lives around the world.
Now to another leader of note, this time the president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, who wasn't at Davos because he was just a little bit busy with something else. He, or rather the ECB, summoned up over €1 trillion for a bond buying programme. In other words, quantitative easing has come to Europe. And it's scheduled to hang around for 18 months, starting this March through to September 2016. Every month, the ECB will pump €60 billion, or around $68 billion, into the economy, which means by the end of it all, we'll be looking at over €1 trillion or dollars. Whichever way you look at it, it is a lot of money. And will it even make a difference? Many Europeans believe stimulus measures will actually do little to improve their situation. Claudia Lavanga has some of their stories from Rome.
Made in Italy revolves around artisans like Fiorella Caroni. She has been making pottery all her life, but now she is one of 260 shop owners across the country who are forced to close their businesses each and every day.
La mancanza di liquidità.
People can't afford to buy anything other than basic necessities anymore. They buy clothes and food, but not pretty and superfluous products like mine.
Italy is one of several European countries in deflation, and consumer confidence is at a record low. The prospect of quantitative easing had a positive effect on the Italian economy. The stock market has been rallying for days, but the fear is that banks, rather than consumers, will reap the benefits.
There is no guarantee that banks will pass on the new liquidity onto consumers. They can either lend it or invest it.
Fiorella thinks that injecting new money is not enough if they are not passed on to businesses like hers.
It could be a solution, but banks need to change their mindset. They can't just give money to those who already have them. They need to invest in people like me, believe in my abilities.
Italians, as the rest of Europe, are unlikely to see the immediate benefits of quantitative easing until they trickle down to them in the form of hard cash.
And still ahead on counting the costs, something powered by nothing but sunshine and with a wingspan longer than that of a Boeing 747. It is the world's first ever solar-powered plane taking off on a 5-month journey. We'll have more on that a bit later. Right now, though, more on the plunge in oil prices, but more specifically the effect it's having on two Asian neighbours, Malaysia, the exporter, and Thailand, the importer. Scott Heidler has this report from Bangkok.
The plunging oil price is good news for most countries in Southeast Asia, as the majority rely on imported oil to run their cars, light their homes, and keep their factories running. Particularly in Thailand, the country has some oil but buys much more than it produces. So the lower price means big savings for the Thai government. And that will trickle down to the people here who are living in a stagnant economy. Analysts say with less dollars going abroad to pay for oil imports, more will be staying in Thailand.
It'll be a big boost to consumer confidence. People can go shopping, spend money on items that are produced here, spend more money on food, on clothes and so forth, rather than spending money on filling their tank.
Others say this is short-lived help for the economy, and the focus during this period of cheap oil should be on saving the untapped oil Thailand still has.
If you don't dig in the indigenous resource, then it will prolong its use.
With extra cash in their pockets, Thais will start spending more, helping their economy. But it's a different story for the neighbor to the south. Lower oil prices will prompt Malaysians to spend less, bad news for their economy. And its currency, the ringgit, weakened to a 5-year low against the US dollar.
This has forced the Malaysian government to relook at its budget for this year.
Heavily dependent on oil revenue. Something like 30% of our government revenues are derived from oil sources. So it's going to be very difficult for Malaysia, obviously, because if oil prices go down, then obviously oil government spending will also reduce, and our economy is also heavily dependent on government spending.
Delayed reforms to reduce that dependence on government dollars will cost Malaysia now. Some feel the impact of these low oil prices could push Malaysia to look into other sources of income, drawing down its reliance on oil revenue. That means if prices go down in the future, it will have less impact on the economy. And back in Thailand, some feel the nation could use its current good news to bring change too, a future less reliant on imported energy, by using this price break on oil as a time to build its renewable energy industry.
Speaking of which, a couple of Swiss pilots put renewable energy in the spotlight this week in Abu Dhabi as they launched a round-the-world trip in the world's first solar plane. Bertrand Piccard and André Boschberg will take off in a couple of weeks on their 35,000-kilometre journey on board Solar Impulse 2. Just imagine this, it is a flight around the world that doesn't use a drop of fuel. Probably no coincidence then, there was a renewable energy summit in Abu Dhabi at the same time, where some nations used the opportunity to up their green credentials. Egypt, for one, announced plans to supply 20% of its needs by the year 2020 through renewables. Our environment editor Nick Clark went along.
There's a real sense that we're on the cusp of big change here, as traditional energy suppliers are having to adapt and as renewables gain more and more momentum, getting a bigger and bigger share of the energy market.
We're absolutely sure that we're at the cusp of the third industrial revolution. We are transforming the way we produce and consume energy. Technology is enabling change at a pace that we hadn't seen before.
Oil mainly supplies the transport sector and not power grids around the world, so even the oil price drop hasn't affected the growth of renewables, and actually it's helped it a little bit because it's reduced the cost of building the components. There's big interest here in sub-Saharan Africa, home to 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies.
Basically we're gas, but then we're also one of the main solar countries in the potentially solar countries in the continent, because we are a large part of Nigeria is on the Sahara. So we are promoting the development of solar energy for energy mix.
The problem with solar panels in the desert is dust, but here there's a solution on display. A robotic cleaner that uses a quarter of the water of manual labor. Solar technology will also help developing nations, where it's all about bringing millions out of poverty. In Malawi, for example, only 9% of the population have access to electricity.
So we are looking at the energy sector, and we're looking at an energy mix, which is currently very much dependent upon wood fuel. So if you look at the future, we believe that we have to look at all energy resources that will be available for a country like Malawi.
Of course, amid all the panel discussions and workshops, climate change is a constant refrain. But the evident rise in renewables is a very big positive as the world seeks a global treaty on climate in Paris at the end of the year.
Well, let's stay with this oil and energy theme and return to Davos to speak to Kirill Dmitriev. He is the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. Kirill, it's nice to see you again on Counting the Cost. Tell me about how you and Russia are feeling the pinch of this falling oil price. You know, is it something you're talking to other people about there? Are you trying to find a way around it?
Well, definitely the Russian economy feels the impact of lower oil prices, and, you know, ruble devalued and growth slowed down. But frankly, Russia really doesn't need very high prices of oil because we want to diversify away from it. But government is now having all sorts of measures to really have a transition plan given the current scenario. We believe the oil prices will rebound in a year or two, maybe not to the previous levels, but to levels of $60, $70. And Russia definitely feels the effects right now.
OK, then. So tell me a little bit more about your experiences at Davos this year. I don't wish to be rude, but what is it like being a Russian there at the moment, given the way the world has changed for Russia in the year since you were last there?
Well, you know, we continue our work, which is we build partnerships with all of the sovereign wealth funds of the world. We continue to invest with those funds. We just closed 2 transactions in the last 2 weeks. We are going to announce a major investment in the airport jointly with Asian investors in the next 2-3 weeks. So frankly, our fund continues to invest and continues to work with long-term investors. So frankly, some media reports that Russia feels isolated at Davos, you know, I don't find them to be true. Definitely, many people are taking investment pause, but long-term investors really understand the cycles and are interested in valuations that they're seeing in the Russian economy right now.
OK. Kirill, you are the CEO, as we mentioned, of a major investment fund, and it was interesting to note a global CEO survey from PwC, which found Russian CEOs were the ones feeling the least confident about the global economic outlook after being the most confident last year. What do you put that down to?
Well, definitely lots of effects are affecting the Russian economy right now, but it's also an impetus for Russia to focus on efficiency, because many of our industries have a potential to increase efficiency 2 or 3 times. This is what needs to happen. Entrepreneurship really needs to be supported. So Russia sometimes really gets its act together when it feels some pressure, and right now there is lots of effort by companies and other people to focus on efficiency. So we believe that this is a crisis that Russia will go through, but will emerge from it stronger and more focused.
Yeah, but what about the elements that you can't really control? You're talking about efficiency, which is the stuff you can tackle internally. But there are external forces putting sanctions on you. There are economic factors which must leave you in a difficult position.
Well, yes and no, because we feel more and more voices in Davos from Europe that they understand the impact sanctions against Russia are having in Europe. Many German businesses face declines of 20% of their revenues. Actually, US hedge fund did analysis for us and showed $300 billion is the potential losses in Europe if there is major crisis in Russia. So the voices of reason have to prevail at some point, because currently sanctions are really affecting very negatively hopes of European recovery, and more business people in Europe understand this. Mr. Lavrov mentioned that more than 50% of EU members are now against sanctions against Russia. So we hope that sanctions will be eased sometime this year.
Kirill Dmitriev from the Russian Direct Investment Fund, we thank you very much for your time. So we mentioned sanctions during that interview, and one country which knows all about those is Cuba. But after more than 50 years of economic isolation, things are changing. This past week, the US held its first high-level diplomatic talks with Cuba since 1961. But are Cubans buying all this talk? Here's Gabriel Elizondo in Havana with the word from the street.
This is the Capitol building in Havana, and it was inaugurated in 1929. And perhaps ironically, it was modeled after the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. But we came here to Havana to talk to regular Cubans from various backgrounds about what they hope to get out of this new relationship between their country and the U.S.
Like Yosvani Terry, a Grammy Award-winning Cuban musician who splits his time between his homeland and New York.
I would love also to see a real exchange in which people can just like travel without restriction and see what United States is about, and then American to come here and to see what Cubans are about, because it's like two neighbors that they haven't seen each other. They know about each other, but they haven't seen each other for many years, and they look from the window and say, oh, maybe they're doing this, but they don't know actually.
And Joel Perez Rodriguez, who is proud of his 1956 Chevrolet, taking tourists on trips around the city.
My expectations are ambitious, and this agreement is good for us. In the United States, there are more than 35 or 50 million tourists that want to come to Cuba and spend their money. And for me, this is a huge benefit, because the second they are in Havana, I can take them around the city and show them what we have to offer. And for me, this is money. I don't care if I have to pay more taxes. I will have work. It helps everybody.
And then there's Harold Cardenas, a 29-year-old PhD student and blogger.
I don't fear change. I fear for things not to change. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried if that doesn't happen. So we have to embrace the things that are changing right now. We have to embrace that. But we also have to do it responsibly, because so many things are going to change right now. Everybody knows that in Cuba. But how do you change a country? And how do you improve things that you need to improve? In Cuba, lots of people know which one are. And how you do all that, preserving things like the health in Cuba, like education, like public safety.
Of course, nobody here in Cuba can predict what kind of economic or diplomatic change will be coming to this island nation, but everybody agrees that this is a country entering a brand new era after living for more than 50 years in near isolation from the United States.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. It is our new look, evolving page. It has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on whenever you'd like. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet either me at Kamal AJE. Our business editor is at Abid Oliver Ali, and do use our new hashtag as well, which is AJCTC. Or just drop us an email. Counting the cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.